Hello everyone, so today I am here to do another reviewing classics series. If you guys didn't know, on here on my channel, every 3 classics I read, I try to do a video reviewing all of them. It's not like necessarily the same author or anything, it's just the last 3 classics that I've read. I have like 4 or 5 other videos doing this, basically ever since I started reading classics. People always ask for reviews on them, so I just started this series. So yeah, today we're reviewing 3 very different books. I'm a little bit behind, so I haven't actually read a classic since these books, but these are from like a couple of months ago. So today I'm talking about Middlemarch, Little Women, and Devils. Yeah, these you guys have all, again, heard of already because I did read them a while ago. But let's just get right on into it. First off, I have Middlemarch by George Eliot. You guys are so sick of hearing me talk about this, I know, but I need to wrap this up. So yes, Middlemarch, it's gonna be like my favorite book of the year, probably. Actually, sorry, there's one more book that I've read since this book that I think is #1, but this is gonna be one of my favorite books of the year. I absolutely loved this book. It was fantastic. So obviously it's a 5-star. Here are all my tabs and stuff because I know people like to look at them. I don't think these had any particular meaning. Actually, they did, but I didn't write it down, I don't think. So I'm pretty sure that red specifically was like commentary about women and like basically men saying like women can't do something. So like misogyny, but it was also like commentary on said misogyny. I think pink was like romance, and yellow and green were quotes, and I can't remember what orange was, maybe plot. But yeah, basically this was fantastic. So basically we follow 3 or 4 couples in Middlemarch, which is like this town, city, and we follow Dorothea, Rosamond, and Mary, as well as like technically we follow Dorothea's little sister, Celia. And basically we follow them through their like romantic excursions, but also mixed with so much political intrigue and stuff of Middlemarch. So yeah, basically at the beginning, all 3, 4 of the, I'm saying 4 because like Celia is definitely a character, like a main character that we do follow her love life, but she's not like one of the main characters. Like we don't really get her kind of viewpoint or anything, but we do watch her romance happen. So that's why I'm saying 4, but it technically really is 3. It's Dorothea, Rosamond, and Mary. But yeah. At the beginning of this book, we basically see them when they're single and being courted and then eventually getting married, and then their marriages mostly falling apart. And they're very, very different stories, and they're very, very different outlooks on love and marriage and stuff like that. I'd say the most interesting character is definitely Dorothea, just mostly because she is so incredibly different from myself, so I found her incredibly interesting to read about. Dorothea, she originally marries a man like 2 or 3 times her age because she thinks that she should be marrying a person she sees as a father figure, which was so weird, and like a person she felt like could teach her because he was a scholar and stuff like that. But then later on kind of meets this man who is just so perfect. I loved him. What's his name? Will, I believe. And oh, he was like her husband's like nephew, I think. Or cousin, they were cousins, but he was like way younger, and it was just so good. And then Rosamond with Dr. Lydgate. Dr. Lydgate was a character that I actually really enjoyed, but I don't think I was supposed to enjoy his character. He was kind of an asshole, but I loved his like whole viewpoint and everything. His chapters were a little bit slower, a little bit more internal monologue heavy than the rest of them, but I really, really enjoyed just hearing his thought process. He was obviously the doctor of Middlemarch and everything, so he kind of was intermingled with like all of the different characters, because quite a few characters kind of stayed completely separate, but Dr. Lydgate was kind of the one that got to see everything happening while also having his own story with Rosamond. Again, really, really liked Rosamond. as well, and then their marriage was the one that kind of like fell apart, and I thought it was just a really interesting story that I don't think I've really seen in a classic or most books. It was very, very realistic to me, where they started out just absolutely in love, and Rosamund kept saying that she didn't mind that he was poor, that he didn't have a lot of money, that doesn't matter to her as long as they're in love, and then financial instability is kind of what tears them apart. I don't think they actually get divorced or anything, but like their marriage just isn't a very happy one, and we kind of see that happen. It was just so interesting. And then we of course have Mary and Fred, whose relationship is incredibly tumultuous and like takes a very long time to even kind of happen. So I just feel like this book was such an amazing look at characters. Like, again, not a ton happens. We really are just following these blooming relationships as well as some politics about Middlemarch, but mostly it really is about these romantic relationships. But it also has just so much about feminism, misogyny, and like women and women friendships, and also like the time period and how people acted and stuff during this time period. And it was just an amazing character study to me, and like almost time study. And I loved this book. It was also just so beautifully written. Like, the prose were so beautiful. I also found this incredibly accessible. I found this book incredibly easy to read. The literal words on the page were incredibly easy to understand. And also, one thing that I really, really enjoyed about how this was told was it was very easy to follow where we were going. One of my critiques with a lot of classics are that, like, it feels like time jumps happen and like scene jumps happen without any real explanation of how we got there, and you just kind of have to infer and figure it out yourself. Middlemarch, I feel like, just flowed really, really well, almost to the point where I would call it similar to a modern novel, with how the flow happens and how the plot kind of happens, and again how we go from scene to scene with a very like obvious thread between scenes, which I really enjoyed. I don't like feeling stupid when I read a book, although I have been really enjoying classics and this classics journey that I've been going on. I prefer understanding what the heck is happening. So yeah, I feel like I can't even say more about this book. It's just one of those things that I feel like I always have more trouble talking about things that I really, really love than things that I just feel meh about or like didn't like. I feel like I can rant about things I didn't like. This is just, I loved the characters, I loved their stories, I loved the way that they're written. And that's what made me love this book so much. So I can't recommend this one enough. It was so good. I feel like I feel about this book the same way a lot of women feel about like Jane Austen. Like, I feel like the way I just absolutely love and like identify with a lot of this book is how I feel like a lot of my friends talk about their relationship with Jane Austen novels. So yeah, I feel like the last one I enjoyed to this extent was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So yes, I love this one so much. It was so good. And then after Middlemarch, I really wanted more, like, girl power. I don't know. I just felt like the characters in Middlemarch were so powerful and such intricately told women in classics. I was just like, I don't think I can pick up another, like, male-focused classic at the moment. So I was like, I really want another just female power classic. So of course, I picked up Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and this, I feel like, is such a fan favorite, especially ever since the movie came out. I feel like I've seen so many people talking about this book. I had never read it. I feel like this is one that a lot of people read when they're in, like, middle school, high school. I never saw the interest in it, and I finally picked it up. And I will say, I wish I'd picked this up sooner, because I genuinely think I would have loved this book if I'd read it when I was in middle school or, again, early high school. But for me, the whole thing with this book was the first half. The entire first half of the book, I just thought was okay. The second half was great. And again, that probably goes into the fact that at the beginning of this book, they're very young. And then at the end of the book, we have a time jump. So they're older, so I'm able to relate to them more. But I think if you read this when you're younger, the beginning is probably great. Yeah, if you somehow don't know what Little Women is, we follow these 4 sisters. Yeah, Meg and Jo and Beth and Amy. During the American Civil War. Yes, the Civil War. And their father is like at war at the very beginning of the book. Actually opens with Christmas, which I thought was so like interesting to open with. I don't know, I feel like Christmas is always like a middle kind of thing, like Harry Potter. I also had no clue that this was an American book. It shows how much I actually fucking knew about this book. I also do feel like I went in with expectations of this book of like who was going to end up together and stuff like that, and they were completely trash. Like I was like, this is so much more complex than I was expecting. I definitely am really interested in watching the movie now, actually, because so many people have like talked about it. Also, this also does have some like tabs. I actually have so many books right now that have so many tabs that I need to put in, and I just haven't yet because I don't have any. I just moved. If you guys didn't notice that this is a new setup, I don't have anything here. But yeah, basically the very beginning of this book, they're quite young. I want to say that they were between like 10 and 13, 15, maybe a little older. Actually, one of my biggest complaints with the beginning of this book is that they felt so young. So I probably am a little off with that. Maybe the oldest was like 17 at the beginning of the book. I genuinely, if you had told me that they were in elementary school, like that they were like between the ages of 5 and 10, I would believe you because they act so young. And one of my least favorite things in novels is reading from children characters. I hate children characters in books. I never really like that. The only book that I enjoy that has a child main character is Imaginary Friend. But they were written so young. Again, I genuinely think in my head they were in elementary school, but I think they were probably teenagers and preteens. And basically the beginning was just a lot of like each chapter the girls would do something or one of the girls would do something, and then it was at the end of the chapter, it was the moral of the story is. And that's basically the entire first part of the book. It almost felt like a collection of short stories about these girls, which if you didn't know, I hate short story collections. So I just didn't get much out of the beginning because again, I don't like short stories. I don't like this like episodic nature of the beginning of this book. I also, this is the moral of the story. I didn't relate to any of this, but it's children's literature. That is probably going to be amazing for little kids, but for an adult who already knows a lot of this stuff, it wasn't entertaining or interesting at all. But the second half of the book makes me like, oh my god, this is children's literature? The second half is leagues better. Again, they are adult women, and they all just kind of go to their separate things. The ending was heartbreaking. There was so much interesting stuff. Again, I had such expectations in my head of like who characters were and who was gonna end up together and stuff. Of course, like the main character I knew was Jo, because I feel like everyone and their mothers is like, oh, I relate to Jo so much because she's a little tomboy and everything. And I assumed she ended up with the boy that I always heard about, but I was wrong. So yeah, the second half was so much better. And again, it follows them as adult women kind of dealing with adult women things, romance, but also very much like family things, and like one girl goes away, like goes abroad and everything. We also deal with death and grief, and I really enjoyed the second half of this book. But unfortunately the first half, I mean, it is a good sized book. It's over 500 pages, and like the first half of this book I really didn't like, so I ended up giving this like a 3.5 stars. Definitely not my favorite classic, and I definitely wish I had read it earlier, because I think it would have been one of my favorite classics ever if I'd read it at a younger age. And then we have another Dostoevsky. We have Devils. This is my, fourth Dostoevsky I've read, and yeah, this one was very in the middle for me. I absolutely love The Idiot and Crime and Punishment, and then Brothers Karamazov was like a 3 star. This was like a 3.5, 4 star. Basically, this was a book that we follow so many different characters, and the the first entire part of this book, I just remember being incredibly confused and actually looking up like the spark notes to make sure I was even understanding what was happening. And basically the very beginning, the first 200 pages is incredibly confusing, but it's like meant to be. Every spark note was like, oh, the beginning is supposed to like foreshadow the chaos and confusion of the rest of the book, and I was like, you did it, because I had no clue what was going on. It's a lot about like, basically we have like two main characters. God, what was their names? Nikolai and then Stephen? Something like that. And the very beginning we follow like their parents and their parents' friendship, and then we kind of get into them, and then there's like this whole, like there's this girl that he married, and very confused at the beginning of this book. But then the rest of the book is very much a satire of the revolutionaries and their naivety, and ludicrous single-mindedness and ready for murder and destruction. The rest of this book is so unnecessarily just filled with murder and basically boys being stupid and just being like, oh, we need to do this. I kept describing this book as, it's one of those things that if you don't know it's a satire, you go into it and you're like, what's happening? And also, why are they all so stupid? But then if you read it as a satire, it's very funny. To be completely honest, this book had me laughing out loud a couple of times. There were just a couple of scenes like when they were trying to like overthrow the government and stuff, where just no one could come to a consensus or even understand what everyone was talking about. Like there's this one scene where the guy's like asking a question. He's like, okay, raise your hand if you like agree. And everyone's like, I don't even understand what the question. And it's just like several pages of them just being like, raise your hand, and they're like, we don't know what's going on. And that's basically what happens throughout the entire book, is a lot of people kind of just doing things because they're told to, even though they don't really understand why. You never really understand the purpose of a lot of what's going on. And again, lots of random murder, like suicides, people like random marriages and divorces, and again, murder, lots of murder. And these two men, they're men, but like in my head they were boys, kind of going against each other, but they were also kind of friends, but kind of betraying each other. It was a lot. It was very, very weird. My biggest critique with this, though, was that at the very end we kind of get a epilogue, like a conclusion, kind of discussing what happened afterward. Like, all these people went to jail, and like these people ended up together, and these people were happy, and then these people did this. I almost wish the book was this. Like, these last couple of pages I thought were so incredibly interesting compared to like the rest of the book, which that's just probably a me thing. I don't love books that have a lot of like violence and murder and unnecessary violence, I guess is what I always kind of describe it as. But the last little bit was just so fascinating to me, and kind of the aftermath. Like, we get like the before and the during, but I almost was more interested in the aftermath of everything that they did. But yeah, there's also a really interesting chapter in this book where something happens. Basically, this main character, Nikolai, he goes to a monk, and he kind of talks about, he kind of confesses to really, really atrocious things that he has done. And it's kind of this question of, did he actually do these things? We don't really know. It kind of comes out of left field. It's like, what? Where did, like, you have not mentioned this in your internal monologue or anything else. You haven't mentioned it this entire book. You never mentioned it again until the very end. And it was just like, where did this come from? But that chapter was actually taken out of this book, which I find really fascinating. So I definitely want to mention that really quick, that if you have this book, it is sometimes put in the appendix at the end, and sometimes it is like worked into the book. Sometimes it's completely taken out. It was taken out of publications for, I believe, 100 years or something like that. Like, it was completely censored, and the like Russian publications were like, we cannot publish this, it's so bad. But yeah, it is chapter 9 in part 2. The original one is called At Tihone's, and then there's also a other chapter 9 that Dostoevsky wrote to replace that chapter 9, which is called A Raid at Stephen Trofimovich's. Yes. But the original chapter 9, it was one of those things that I was kind of like, oh, I'm so interested to see what was so bad that Russia had to censor it for 100 years. But then I read it and maybe I was just like, I'm just a desensitized bitch of America, but like, I didn't think it was that bad, as well as I was just like, this is so crucial to the end of the book. Like, there's some parts of this book make no sense if you take out that chapter, so I was kind of just shocked that they were able to take it out, because again, a lot doesn't really make sense if you take that chapter away. I was also kind of like, it was one of those interesting things that like a lot of places said that it was censored because it was so horrible. Like what Nikolai was admitting to was just so bad, like they didn't want to subject people to it. But I kind of read it and I was like, this I feel like is a conversation that we should be having. Like, I thought it was a really awesome commentary by Dostoevsky. So yeah, it was just a really interesting chapter, and knowing that that chapter had been taken out and getting to it and seeing what it was really fascinating to me. So I did end up enjoying this book. Again, if you go in not knowing it's a satire, I don't think it's a good book. But if you go in knowing it's a satire and almost just can kind of have a laugh at these characters and how overly stupid and how overly, like, over the top in general they are, I think it's a really interesting book. So yeah, I ended up really enjoying this one, and I don't know who the heck I'd recommend it to. If it sounds interesting, check it out. But yeah, I ended up really enjoying this one, and I give it 4 stars. But yeah, so these are the 3 books that I reviewed in this reviewing 3 classics book series thing that I do. Anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed this review video, and definitely check out more that will be coming out or previous ones if you're interested. But yeah, anyways, I love you all and I'll see y'all soon. Bye!